Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT Show. This is show 198. As always, we welcome you warmly, and we guarantee you that we'll have something to say, and we will have experts to say it as well. So you do want to tell your friends and family, this is the place to go. If you want to see some really interesting interviews with some really interesting people, and last week was no exception, and neither is tonight. So I am, and I hope you are looking forward to our guest tonight. I just want to say a few remarks about this being a great day for British democracy. We learned today that the Labour Party, bless its cotton socks, has added to the gaiety of the nations by issuing a leaflet in Glenrothes that manages to misspell the word Scottish. So Scottish Labour is only spelt with one T. It's hard to think of anything more incompetent, but then again, if your leaflets are not produced in Scotland, perhaps that's one of the risks that you run. It is just plain crazy, or maybe it's the case that they don't have anyone around to proofread. I don't know. Maybe the candidate can't read. Who knows? It's up to the good voters in Glenrothes to indicate how they feel about a candidate who can't even spell the name of his own country. But then again, he may not be from here. I don't know. You know, many of the Labour MPs now strutting their stuff at Westminster have very tenuous connections with the country that they were elected and the area and the constituency that they were elected to represent. You know, there's always been this big discussion about within the SNP and the Scottish parties generally, that if you've been elected, your primary role is to represent your constituents. So even though you may feel that your presence at the Mother of Parliaments is actually self-defeating for the course of independence, nevertheless, your primary responsibility is to your constituents. Well, just look at how Labour have responded to that primary responsibility. People have been elected and have stayed in the south. They haven't opened up constituency offices. Why should they? They're not going to be there for terribly long. So, you know, the reality is that the Labour Party doesn't concede that the primary responsibility is to the constituents. So why should the Party of Independence? So let's see how this all works out. Enough of that. Let's move on to our guest tonight. I'm happy to welcome Dr. Mark McNaught, who will be talking to us about a whole range of things, including the upcoming conference in Dunfermline on May 16. So without further ado, let's all welcome Mark McNaught. Hi, Mark. How are
Hello.
you?
Good evening. Good evening, everybody who's watching, and I'm delighted to be back on your show again. It's always a pleasure.
It's a great pleasure for us to have you here. Tell us first and foremost about the gathering in Dunfermline. What's it all about? Who's running it?
We held a conference about I think nearly 3 years ago in Dunfermline, and it was a very good success. We had about 700 people attend, and then we didn't for a couple summers, and then we decided that this is a really good time to hold a conference. In that the independence movement's kind of stuck right now, but there are things going on behind the scenes, and we feel. And last summer I spoke with Jim Sillars, and he was of the view that whenever there is the opportunity for independence to be achieved, that there needs to be more homework done before then. He was of the view that during the famous debate between Alistair Darling and Alex Salmond, when Darling asked Salmond about what will you do if the Bank of England does not allow you to use the pound as a currency, and he didn't have an appropriate response. Jim Sillars was of the view that that many people must have felt that the homework hadn't been done, that there was a lot of stuff that needed to be done beforehand, kind of preparation. that had not been done at that point. So it was in that spirit that we've got this conference together. For those of you who wish to attend, it's the email address is it's on the screen, ssrg.conference.com. Please buy the tickets. There's still a couple of weeks left for the early bird tickets for £25. Sorry, £25 for the 3 days. And we've got a very good load of excellent speakers. On the Friday, we will first of all have in the morning we will have Neil Hanvey and Jim Osborne and Tommy Sheridan speaking about the welfare system. In Hall B, Tim Rideout will be doing on currency and banking. In the afternoon, Jim Sillers and Elliot Bulmer will be speaking, and myself as well. Jim Sillers will be talking about the things that will need to be negotiated with the RUK following independence. Things like the division of assets and liabilities. What are the spheres of influence? What does in the effort not to rock the boat too much and to cause too much concern? What are the kind of geopolitical things that need to be considered when negotiating with the RUK over independence? Elliot Bulmer will be speaking, predictably about the constitutions and what the possibilities are. I will be, it's not mentioned there, but I will be speaking about economic planning, what kind of things would need to be done in order to, set up some kind of economic planning department. And, so that whether we join EFTA or the EU, that the institutions are in place to enable, the membership to be done. Second day, that's actually that hasn't been updated yet, but it will be in the first in the afternoon will be the decolonization and self-determination with Craig Murray, Alf Baird, and Sarah Salyers. And in the morning, again, what Kevin has on screen will be updated, and and also there will be a thing on free ports in the morning as well. Also in the morning, again, this is switched, will be energy policy, which is listed there in the afternoon. Again, those will be switching places. And Phil Boswell and I forget his name, Reese something will be speaking about renewable energy. And then the following day on the Sunday in the morning will be EFTA EEA. We will have Norway and EU borders. We'll have two people from Norway will be speaking about the opinions of the Norwegians about EU versus EFTA membership, because that has come up in the Norway, because there is a portion of the population that wishes to join the EU. Apparently, there have been polls taken, and they still would prefer to remain in EFTA. So that will be a subject of debate. And then in the afternoon will be kind of a wrap up of the different, bringing together what we have concluded at the conference, and hopefully what the next steps will be, and how we kind of go from there. And we'll also be taking a survey on one of the survey programs. It's similar to SurveyMonkey. I forget which one it was, but there'll be a lot of questions asked to get people's opinions about these different issues like welfare, EFTA, EEA, what the route to independence, these types of things. And we'll be revealing the results of this survey in the final session on the Sunday. So, we've got a lot of really good speakers. We've got a lot of, interesting topics to address. And we feel that it's a really good time to have it, just because, again, from a political point of view, it seems kind of, a little bit stuck. But I think that I'm hoping that this conference will begin to give some impetus to the independence movement, and that we can move forward in doing at least more preparation in anticipation of some trigger to ultimately achieve independence. Yeah. So
it sounds good. It sounds good, and I hope you get a good turnout. The program looks fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you the inevitable question. Who do you have from the Scottish government?
No one. We have Neil Hanvey, but he's a former MP. So,
Doesn't that
I mean,
tell you something?
nobody from the current Scottish government. We have sent the invitation to my colleague David Henry sent an invitation to everybody in the Scottish Parliament, but nothing. I don't know whether. I don't think anybody so far has done that, and that speaks to a kind of a shielding. It feels as if on the part of the Scottish government. A few months ago, I had been in touch with EFTA. I went to a conference there about 18 months ago, and I just went to a conference last month that I'll speak about in a few minutes. But I informed a member of the Scottish government that was in charge of treaties. And I asked if he wanted to learn about EFTA because I've been in touch with them. I've spoken to them about Scottish membership. And I said, can I Zoom you? And he said, yes. And I said, when are you available? I gave him dates when he was. I didn't hear back from him. I got back in touch. And then one of his underlings or someone else sent me an email saying, we don't want to have a talk. I don't understand why. It was absolutely bewildering, but it just seems as if the Scottish government is kind of impervious to the possibilities, and I don't understand. But they did not want to even broach the subject about EFTA EEA, and and so I don't know why they don't want to participate. Maybe some will appear. I don't know, but so far we have not gotten any response.
So you're having this conference on independence, which apparently, I mean, an objective observer might view as being the central tenet of the raison d'etre of the SNP, which runs the Scottish government, and yet nobody is going to turn up to talk about it.
Not as far. I'm not excluding the possibility that some people will, but I did invite some.
Wouldn't you have thought,
go ahead.
In any sort of sensible world, that as a Scottish government, whose main aim, we're often told, is independence, that they couldn't have afforded somebody, however junior, to come along and learn a few facts?
One would think so, and it just seems as if and as well as I know prior to the 2014 referendum, you had been in touch with members of the Scottish government, and it's almost as if all of this work that all of us are doing, I hope it serves some purpose at some date, but it seems as if so much of the efforts of the independence movement have just been almost ignored.
Doesn't it worry you, or maybe you could raise this at the conference, by the way, because so many of the people who come on our show share the same confusion.
Yeah.
So if it's not just you, it's not just your conference, it's the fact that this is a very general concern. So it speaks to needing an answer. But isn't it troublesome that the Scottish government is sitting there in a far better position than any of the people at your conference to make a major contribution, that they don't wish to take any part whatsoever in these discussions? You're saving them legwork, you're saving them time, you're certainly saving them money, because if you weren't doing it, they would have to hire somebody, right? Yeah. And I can tell you, and you know this as well as I do, that if you go out and hire consultants, right, you're looking at 3 or 4, at the very best, even a low-level consultant is going to cost you $500 a day.
Yeah, easy.
A decent consultant is going to cost you 10 times that per day, right? And looking at the starry cast list that you have there, right? If you tried to get all of these people together and paid them for their time, right, it would take a substantial budget. But here you are, you're doing all this work, which they're going to hopefully benefit from. Well, maybe this is the problem. Maybe this is the very nub of it. They don't see any benefit in this. That's the troublesome thing.
It is, and given what you and Elliot and so many other people have done over the years, I mean, we've done probably millions of dollars worth of research, if you actually had this, farmed out to consultants to, to what Tim Rideout's done on currency, what Elliot has done on
Precisely.
constitutions, all of this stuff. This is, invaluable. And just the, the total kind of almost like they don't want to know about it. And I really don't understand.
Do you perhaps suspect that the reason that they shun input, valuable input, is because they're frightened? I.e., is it become the nature of the Scottish government that their primary purpose in life is not to offend Westminster?
I think so. I think there's a genuine skittishness on their part. I mean, I've had dealings with the Scottish government before, and they're kind of, at first they're kind of receptive to it, and then you almost feel like they want to distance them from you, from the person, and and maybe for different reasons, but it just seems as if that's something that's recurring, with all of the people that I know that have contributed to it, and it's like what's the point? I mean, I'm doing it because I want, in my lifetime to see independence achieved, and for me to have played some role in that would be more than enough.
Don't you think they ought to feel some sense of shame? I mean, for example, when you dropped me a note saying that you'd like to do this, you mentioned that Willie Wilson had passed away.
Yes.
And you added, I remember going to see him with you when we were seeking funds for a survey.
Yeah.
So this is a critical point in your note to me, and people should listen to this.
Yes.
Because it carries such weight and gravity for me. You said, it's so sad that another indie supporter has left us before independence.
Yeah, and then that's the case with many people. With Willie Wilson, I'm Jim Sillars, he's still alive and kicking, but he's getting on with age, and he'll be speaking about a conference, but I don't know how many more conferences he'll be able to do. And there's so many other people that have passed. Alex Salmond, I mean, perfect example. And so many others, and how long do we have to wait for them to make a move, or to at least show, at least give some sign that they've got a path?
But isn't this the problem though? You are doing this great work, and you've been doing it for some time, and as you say, others equally have been putting their shoulders to the wheel, thanklessly, from the point of view of the Scottish government. I mean, all this effort, not even a word of thanks, not even a murmur of appreciation, and yet they're busy, as it were, just essentially constraining themselves to dealing with what's at their feet. In other words, is there a little tweak we can make to this, a little tweak we can make to that? Can we somehow engineer a small headline in BBC Scotland News? And you think of all that effort and absolutely zero effort going into their main priority, which we were told is independence.
No, absolutely.
And you're doing it. Your colleagues in Dunfermline on May 16 through 18 are doing it. But shamefully, they're not doing anything.
Yeah. No, and they put out a few papers. I mean, on different things like currency and all that, but it's not really kind of concrete, and it doesn't seem to be really, a lot of them. I haven't read all of them in full, but it seems kind of abstract and not really getting to the cutting to the chase. What are the things that need to be done? What are the perspectives of doing it? And I'll get in. We'll be talking about EFTA versus the EU in a couple of minutes. But it's just like they don't realistically look at what is doable. And again, it seems as you said, it seems as if they don't want to ruffle the feathers of Westminster. Because the Scottish, administration, the Scottish civil service is basically an appendage of the British civil service. There is the Parliament, but they're,
hold on a second. That sounds like an excuse, not a reason. That was the same arrangement that Alex Salmond presided over. Yet he went ahead and took the tolls off the Forth Road Bridge. He went ahead and renamed the Assembly a Parliament. He did all sorts of things. He didn't sit there like a bump on a log and say, I don't want to offend some minister in Westminster. I mean, you must be, and I'm probably speaking for many, you pick up the daily prints, and it's some Scottish government minister deploring something that's happened at Westminster.
Yeah.
You say,
Oh, I
okay,
know.
okay, you say, you've deplored it. I agree with you. It's deplorable. What are you going to do about it? The answer, zero.
Exactly.
Zip.
Exactly. There was Kate Forbes talking. We need to reverse the internal market bill. No, get into EFTA, get independence, and get into EFTA. I mean, it seems so. I mean, it's always like, oh, we don't like this, we don't like that. Well, what are you going to do about it? How are
Exactly.
you? How are you going to make it happen? And give us an idea. I mean, maybe you're not be able to do it the next day, but at least show a path, show a consciousness that you understand the limitations that you're living with under Westminster, and that you want to get out of it. But it just seems as if they just want to complain and whine about, what we have to do this Westminster. But not saying, well, do something about it.
The human condition is this, surely, that if you complain and do nothing, right, you're an empty vessel, and you've told the whole world that you're empty. Mm-hmm. That's the damnable thing. And because they represent the Scottish people in this respect, everybody Scottish is tarred with the same brush, i.e. you sit there and complain, but you know something, you ain't going to do anything about it. So you know what else is going to happen? The next time I feel it in my water to give you a kick, I'm going to give you another kick. Yeah, because I know you're going to do nothing about it. Yeah, and that's the sad reality. So what happens over time is the little bit of power that you did have is taken away.
Yeah. Yeah. And the SNP in the last election, they lost, they lost thousands of votes just because it didn't want to go out, because, people didn't go out and vote. And so they lost, I don't know how many MPs in the last election. So, and it's no wonder if there's not it was specifically not a, referendum on independence. They haven't even attempted to make any of the several elections, both Holyrood and Westminster since then, into an actual referendum on independence. They just said, oh, if you vote for it, we'll have it. But nothing's happened. There's been other than talking about holding some kind of referendum. A few years ago, it'll be Sturgeon was like, book the date next year. Didn't happen. And then they went to court, and the court said, oh, well, Scotland doesn't have the
you've just illustrated it perfectly.
Yeah.
We interviewed a very nice man from Fife who actually did, 2 years before the Scottish government went to the Supreme Court, he did it himself. He financed it himself. He went to the Supreme Court. They gave him the same answer. 2 years later, they gave the Scottish government, and he went back to the Scottish government and says, if you're going to do anything, don't do it this way. So he did what you're doing. He actually did the heavy lifting, and then said to them, right, here's a mistake that I made. Yeah. You don't need to do it now. Instead of that, they went straight ahead and did it and got the expected response. Yes. Honestly, if you landed here from Mars, you would say, what's wrong with you? Yeah. It's not as if you don't know. It's not as if the information is not there. You choose to shun it. That makes no sense. It makes no sense.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Again,
let's move on to a question that came up just now. It's about unionists will point to the US sanctions on the EU as being a reason that Scotland should stay in the Union, and the feeling is that there ought to be some argument to counter if sanctions still remain.
Yeah, well, I mean, if that is a valid point. I think that, because they put 20% on the EU and the 20% on 10% on the UK, 25% for British cars, by the way. So cars are singled out as separate. But I think that's more an argument to get out of the UK and to make your own trading arrangements, with EFTA but again, just decouple, and then, okay, is Trump going to put 10% on Scotland? I don't know. Maybe he has golf courses here. Maybe he won't want to. Maybe he'll kind of carve a little, his little a soft spark for Scotland in his heart. Maybe, we'll leave them alone. We'll leave them exempt, just like we did Russia and Belarus.
You made a gross assumption there that Donald Trump has a heart.
Oh yeah,
I think that's pushing it back. I mean, I like you very much, but that's just pushing it too far. I mean, nobody's going to believe that. They just aren't. But seriously, when I looked at the list of places being sanctioned, amongst the herd in the McDonald Islands, which are occupied only by penguins and where there are no people, he also included, as a separate line item, Gibraltar.
Really?
Did you know that?
No, I did not. I didn't see it. I saw the list, but I didn't realize.
He actually said that the sanctions against Gibraltar will be X. Now I'm thinking, now hold on a second here. If I was the Spanish government, I'd be saying, well, this is interesting. This guy obviously sees Gibraltar as having sovereignty. In other words, he has deemed Gibraltar to be separate. Now, he also did that for Northern Ireland, but by default. In other words, he had a group of sanctions for the UK and a separate group of sanctions for the Irish Republic, suggesting that he was treating Northern Ireland separately. But that's an assumption. This was black and white. It said categorically Gibraltar, and this is the way we're going to treat them. It's like, I don't know, somebody suggested to me that when they drew up the sanctions, they didn't actually use a map. They went to the suffixes for emails. In other words, if it said .co.uk, then that was separate. If it has .gib, that was separate.
It may be. I've heard it. I heard it may have been artificial intelligence that did it. I have no idea. I mean, and it's the same bizarre methodology they use to actually calculate the tariffs. We'll talk more about that at the end of at the last part of the show.
Let's talk a little bit about what sort of reaction you got from the people you met with in Brussels when you were talking about EFTA and EEA. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I went to twice a year in Brussels. There is the EFTA House, and the headquarters of EFTA are in Geneva, but EFTA has the EFTA House in Brussels because they're in very, very close contact with the EU, and every 6 months they have an EEA conference. Now, just to be clear, the EEA is the European Economic Area, and all of the Europe, and it's basically the single market. And all of the 27 members of the EU are in the EEA, and 3 of the 4 members of EFTA are also in the EEA. So Switzerland is not in the EEA. They are part, and now I'm sure you're aware, a major component of the EU is to respect the 4 freedoms of movement: goods, services, capital, and workers. And all 4 of them abide by that. 3 of them, Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein, are in the EEA, and they abide by those 4 freedoms through the EEA treaty that came out roughly in '93, I believe, at the same time as the Maastricht Treaty was being applied. Switzerland does respect the 4 freedoms, but they have a series of bilateral agreements with the EU to do that. It's much more complicated, and so. They tried, I think, last year, and Switzerland was negotiating with the EU over trying to make some kind of meta, treaty but they couldn't do it, so they're still stuck with the same old treaties. But it's much more easier to be in the EEA now. To suffice it to say, when David Henry and I were there about 18 months ago, we asked one of the speakers, if the president, Mr. Henri Guettaz, if Scotland applied, could they join? And he was like, yes, if they become independent, they can pose their candidacy and, perhaps be admitted. We spoke to numerous people who who were very enthusiastic about Scottish membership, including the registrar of the EU, the EFTA court, who's a big fan of Scotland, would really like Scotland to join, but Scotland has to make the move for themselves. They can't.
Yeah.
Once Scotland becomes independent, they simply send a letter to the EFTA, to EFTA. They will consider the candidacy, and as long as it's done through a democratic event, it could be a referendum, it could be whatever, they would I can't speak on their behalf, obviously, but they would very carefully and sympathetically consider it.
Sure.
Then the three members of the EEA, excluding Switzerland, would then take Scotland's case to the EEA Council, after which, if they got preliminary approval, it would be up to each of the 27 30 members, including the EFTA states, to ratify Scotland's membership, and that might take some time. It's just similar in that sense that there has to be agreement, but once there was the kind of the initial, if the EEA Council approves Scottish membership, then it's very doubtful that any of the states would derail it or, go against the wishes of it. It's hard to say, and I can't predict with any certainty,
Sure.
But there's no question that there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. And I think the advantages of the EFTA is, there is no reason why Scotland could not join the EFTA and then join an EEA and then join the EU later. Numerous countries, including the UK, were members of EFTA before becoming members of the EU. And it was sort of seen as a kind of a waiting room for the EU for some time. But you've had countries like Norway, which have had 2 referendums on EU membership, and that was declined each time. They preferred to remain in EFTA. And the difference is that they are in the free market, the single market. They do all respect the 4 freedoms. So, if Scotland was a member, you could, and you can join a la carte the different EU programs and institutions. So a perfect example, Erasmus, the student exchange program. Scotland could join Erasmus, no problem. They have to pay in to the, to these organizations,
Sure.
but they can pick and choose of which ones which programs they want to participate in and what organizations they want to participate in.
Given all of that, Mark, and the very warm reception that you received there, it begs the obvious question: how many Scottish government officials have been and done what you did?
I would assume 0. We did 18 months ago. There was a someone from the Scottish government who was kind of clandestine. I don't think he wanted to know the others to know that he was there. And David Henry asked the question about Scotland becoming a member of EFTA, and the guy from the Scottish government, he wasn't a member of the Scottish government. He was part of the delegation, I think, that was in Brussels. He's like, don't tell him that wasn't me asking. It was almost like they didn't want to even be associated with it. Or
it's
they didn't.
Pathetic. If that is accurate, it's pathetic. You would expect, let's just, at some stage, there will have to be a negotiation about separation from the UK. And you would have thought that some simple homework would have been done ahead of that time. Mm-hmm. So that when you are in negotiations and the other guy says, we're going to make it more difficult for you to do X and Y, that you will be able to counter that, that's what negotiations are, by saying, if that's the case, then we will do A, B, and C.
Yes.
Because we've already spoken to A, we've had a deal with B on the table for 6 months now, waiting for ramification. And C, here's a letter from C saying, you're welcome anytime.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
If you don't do that,
it would help immensely in negotiations.
It seems to me like you're not sincere.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and there's no question that being a member of EFTA would be amazingly helpful with negotiations with the RUK, because after all, EFTA has an arrangement already with the UK. Some kind of, I don't know the exact nature of it, but they've got it. EFTA has a trading arrangement with the UK, in addition to all of their other free trade agreements that they have negotiated with different. With different countries and different bilateral and multilateral agreements. And I believe so. EFTA, is a member of the single market, but they're able to make trade agreements completely independent of the EU. And I believe that the individual countries are also able to make their own bilateral agreements as well. So yeah, if you were able to sit down with the UK and they say, well, what about trade? Well, we're a member of EFTA, so we've got the same trading. We will have the same trading arrangement with you that you do with the other EFTA states. End of story. But again, the Scottish.
I'm reminded, and I'm sure you're reminded too, that in just after 1776, the American government sat down with the French government and said, look, we're short of a few bob here, and we could use some troops. And by the way, if you've got any muskets or cannonballs, in fact, ideally some cannon as well, these would all be very welcome. Mm-hmm. And the French government said, yeah, but, we have to do this sort of discreetly, because the last thing we want to do is get the English government, stroke British government, all upset and give them a reason, cause us belly, a reason to declare war. So this was all done.
Yeah,
and Ben Franklin was in the middle of it all, and there was a British spy on his staff who was sending copies of all the American correspondence straight to London. But despite that, right, they were able to obtain significant resources in order to prosecute the war. This is realpolitik. This is what grown-up politicians do. Yeah. They go out there, they test the boundaries all the time, because if you don't, what happens is that the other guy will test your boundaries.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what life is like. This is not rocket science. This is human nature. So if you sit there like a bump on a log, the other guy's going to come to you and say, that little bump you're sitting on, I'm going to make it smaller.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only way you can stay on your log and a bump is to go out to the other guy and say, we plan to make the bump on the log bigger. In fact, we plan to take over the log. And you have to do something about it. So you force the pace. If you don't force the pace will be forced on you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that reminds me another thing. I've spoken to Craig Murray before, who's has a lot of international experience, knows a lot of people internationally, and he offered to the Scottish government to say, hey, I can contact different members of different governments and ask their opinion. They didn't want it. They refused to, not to allow him to do it, but they wouldn't take any information from it. And, that only kind of reinforces the, I think, accurate perception that the
impression that people outside the UK get is of a Scottish government cowering.
Yeah.
A group of people cowering because they're terrified to upset anyone in London. It's not just London, it's everywhere, frankly.
Yeah.
It just so happens that the main focus is between Edinburgh and London, but it's like, we don't want to cause offence to anyone. Yeah. I'll tell you what we'll do, though. We'll go and parade up and down some streets in New York with a saltire.
In a kilt, yeah.
Because we got permission from Westminster to do something to encourage business, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to be offended now. So we're doing it within the confines. We're in a little cage, and we're going to stay within the little cage and not upset the keeper outside.
Yeah.
Because that would be very bad for us, and we are terrified. Whereas the way to terrify the person outside is to shake the bars of the cage.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah. All the time.
No,
and if you look at the history of peoples that became liberated, that was part of the route they followed down. They had other ways that they had other levers that they pulled at the same time. But you have to be able to make the other guy uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it ain't going to happen for you, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I also I heard through the grapevine through somebody I know who has had contact with the French delegate, the French consulate in Edinburgh, and they're just amazed that the Scottish government is not doing more, to prepare to lay the groundwork for independence. This is the French delegation, and they're like,
Yeah,
"Go, man!
yeah.
What are you waiting for?"
I
But
tell you what, one of our viewers has just made the most eloquent comment. He said, Tartan Day has nothing to do with independence. That's why the Scottish government was there,
yeah, yeah,
because that was understood. This has got nothing to do with independence. Great, off you go then, kid,
yeah,
and play in the sandpit and then come back. But for God's sake, don't do anything. And by the way, we're going to send some of our idiots.
yeah.
Uh, and they're going to parade up and down behind you or in front of you or sideways, And furthermore, we'll get our prize clown in Washington, D.C., a nice guy called Mandelson, and he will talk to your third party, the leader of your third party in Scotland. And that's just to show you our power,
Yeah,
and how little we think of you. Now, the very fact that that happened should have been a quasi political incident. Somebody in the Scottish government should have said, up with this, we will not put. But they didn't, and they won't.
Yeah.
And I think this is the nub of it.
Yeah.
If you're constantly cowering and kowtowing, all that happens is you get kicked more. It's as simple as that. It's
Well,
not.
I mean, it's just
nothing to do with independence.
It's just so servile and supine, and again, just not wanting to.
No
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to infer we wanted.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I upset you.
Oh, don't be offended, Westminster. We won't do it again. Oh, don't be mad at us. I mean, and you gotta. I mean, obviously it shouldn't be violent. I mean, we don't want to go through what Ireland went through, but after after 19.
Or India or United States. Or you could name all the places where there was a physical disruption. But at the same time, there was lots of things that Gandhi did had nothing to do with violence.
Yeah.
He said we shouldn't pay. Does this sound familiar? We shouldn't pay that tariff. That's what he said.
Right. Yeah, it does.
You put a tariff on salt.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to pay it. I'm going to walk to the nearest place where I can get salt. And the British government said, that's defiance, and we'll beat the what's it out of you if you do that. And he said, well, go ahead and beat me.
Yeah.
This is not rockets. This has all been done before.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about anything that's novel or creative.
Oh, absolutely. And all of the civil disobedience of the civil rights movement in the United States. I mean, it obviously can be done. It can be done without violence, and it is a question of showing backbone, a will, and a desire, and not being afraid to, offend the rule, the powers that be, and say, look, we're sick of this crap, I mean, and especially now that, I mean, the UK has lost so much international credibility, as you were saying before we got online. I mean, the empire is in its sunset, it's just a little bit of sun still sticking out there before it goes below the horizon, and they're thrashing around, and there's Brexit, and now there's these Trump tariffs. I mean, and if there was ever a time for Scotland to, strike out on its own and find its own destiny, now is the time. Exactly. Now is not the time. Let
me just add one thing before we move on to Trump.
Please.
Having credibility is a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
If you don't grab a bit, the opposition will, and so you'll either be augmented or you'll be reduced. But that's your choice. To act as if you have no choice, effectively, is to concede that the other guy can always come and take a bite out of what you have. And that's just nuts, because that's exactly what's going to happen. I mean, crazy. Anyway, enough of that.
Before we move on, I just wanted to just say that, the vibe I got when I was at that EFTA conference is Scotland belongs there. It's not, Scotland is not far from Iceland. It's not far from Norway. Scotland is naturally a Nordic country, being in the North Sea, and the people are delightful. They would love to have Scotland, but the Scottish people have to make the first move. They can't do it for us. That's
of course. If you're sitting in any of these countries, you'd be saying, well, you have to start. I'll help you, but you need to start.
Yeah.
It begins with you.
Exactly. And I have no doubt that they would help us that EFTA would be more than delighted to help us
Yeah.
develop our
Okay.
institutions, so that they would fit within the EFTA framework. And, there is so much goodwill. I mean, like myself, I mean, you have all of these, civil servants and lawyers and all that would love nothing more than to help Scotland,
Now,
get off to a good start institutionally.
somebody, I want to get your reaction to this. Somebody's raised a point saying, have these guys read the 1998 Scotland Act, and do they know about its limitations?
I'm not sure about that. I would imagine they have, but it's a question of like the colonial. I mean, I think when I was on with you last time, I think I talked a lot about the colonial charters that the United States was governed under their, as colonies, and the Scotland Act's pretty much a colonial charter. It sets very specific things, what you can do and what you can't do, and the reserved and devolved powers. And you have to break out of that in some way, not in a violent way, but they have to be defined.
Let's look at what happened in the United States. United States, roughly 1/3 of the people wanted separation, independence. 1/3 were very happy with the Union, and they thought the king was descended from God, and it was blasphemy to do think otherwise. And 1/3 were in the middle. The British had a problem with tea. They had vast quantities of tea that they had to dump, and they said to the Americans, "You're going to have to take this tea." The Americans said, "Well, we'll take the tea." No, you don't understand. There's a tea and a tariff.
Right.
So you have to take the tea, and therefore you have to swallow the tariff. So a whole bunch of kids dressed up in Indian costumes went to Boston Harbor and threw the whole lot overboard. Now, was that an act of violence?
No.
Was that somebody just pushing the boundaries? Or was it something else? The end result, of course, was the British sent troops. And these troops
the intolerable acts, and yes.
Yeah, and they ended up shooting civilians. That's generally what happens. Now, I'm not suggesting we go down any of that route, but what I'm suggesting is there's not a heck of a lot wrong in saying that this is unacceptable, and if you don't stop it, I will do the following. What is not sensible is to say this is unacceptable, and so what? Yeah. As soon as you say so what, you've lost the argument. Anyway, enough of that. Let's talk about Trump.
Yes.
Because Trump has just announced that there's going to be a 90-day hiatus.
Yes.
On the tariffs, except for China.
Has he? Just now, because that's the first I've heard of it. So, okay, I'd like to know more about that, and it'll be interesting to see how that works out. What I understand about his reasoning, if you can call it that, is he looks back to the 1890s when there were under William McKinley, when there were quite high tariffs, and at that time America was kind of at its industrial peak, after the end of the Gilded Age, where and at that time, I mean, it was a very different world, and so that whether it was the steel and the railroads and all that. They would have protective tariffs that would prevent, the other. But once there was a big tariff act passed in 1890 when McKinley, I believe, was a senator, if I'm not mistaken, or a representative, I'm not sure. But anyway, they passed these tariffs, and then the Republicans got a beating the next year in the midterm elections because.
Remind us all what happened to McKinley.
Well, he was elected president later in 1896, and he was president during the Spanish-American War, when America kind of expanded its empire to the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Cuba, but later on. The tariffs were eventually dropped under the Underwood Tariff Act. This was after he left office, and then it was replaced by the income tax. Similarly, in 1930, there was the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which were adopted just after the beginning of the Great Depression, which certainly did not help the Great Depression at all, because international trade basically ground to a halt. So the Americans couldn't export. And I'm concerned that that's what's going to happen now, especially if he's, imposing tariffs on, the rest of the world, especially China. And the thing is that he's put the highest tariffs on the countries that have the most trade with them. For example, Vietnam, which is a poor and developing country that America pretty much destroyed for 10 years, they've gotten a very high tariff, but they're importing, shoes and textiles and stuff. And, why are they're being so punitive? Taiwan, Korea, Japan, the biggest trading partners have the highest tariffs, presumably because they want to.
I was trying to encourage you earlier to explain, tell us all how President McKinley left office.
Well, he was assassinated, actually.
Yeah, he was assassinated.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, and then Theodore Roosevelt became president after that.
So he left involuntarily.
Involuntarily, yes.
Oh my word! So we've got a situation now where you have a president who has decided that world trade is going to be a thing of the past, and world trade can only be conducted on his basis. And it turns out that the authority he has for these measures is based on a book by a guy who misrepresented himself by saying that his thoughts were prompted by a person who didn't exist, i.e. took his own name and changed the letters around and said, I get all my help from this guy who's an acknowledged expert. His name is Navarro. And he said he was being helped by Ron Averon or some such thing. Such a facile distortion makes you wonder what, if any, thinking has gone into any of this.
I don't think much. I mean, what he said is he wants to bring back industry and to get rid of the trade deficits. Now, a trade deficit just means you buy more from other countries than you sell to other countries. And America, as the biggest consumer nation, that makes sense, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It also helps that because the other countries we are able to sell, or that we're buying it. We also are able. That's been part of America is accumulating so much debt. In so doing. But now tariffs have been used to some decent effect. At the beginning of the United States, there was a tariff on a British iron, for example, because that was favoring the domestic iron industry so that they could develop and mature. And then once it did mature and was be able to competitive with other countries, then they would want the other countries to lower their tariffs so that they could sell their iron there. So it has been used effectively, but I don't know that it's ever been so broad in its scope to where even things that Americans don't make, or barely make, things like textiles and shoes and, toys and, household items and, microwave ovens and television sets and all of these electronics that, have been made successfully in Asia for so many years. And are virtually, I don't think we have any TV factories in the United States, for example, to charge tariffs on them, even though we don't make it. And the idea that all of these companies are going to set up factories in the United States, that takes years, and any company that's going to make a factory in the United States wants to make sure that if they do, then it's not going to these things are not going to be reversed with the next president. And so first of all, I agree that there hasn't been much thought going into this. It just seems like a desperate move, like a Hail Mary pass in American football to try to get industry back, but it's so much more complex. I mean, maybe
there's a fundamental reality here. I watched a nice interview with a guy who asked a question, and the question he asked was simple. He said, in the United States, that if I go down any main street, it's full of German and Japanese cars.
Yeah.
When I go to Japan, I don't see any American cars.
Mm-hmm.
So Trump is right. They're biased against us, and we have
Mm-hmm.
to take measures to rectify that bias.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that American consumers buy Japanese and German cars because they're better products.
Exactly.
And if you try and deny that illogicality, right, it takes you to the very place that you want to try and avoid. In other words, you're protecting people who really ought not to be protected because they make crap products.
No, exactly. And you do. I mean, and for Europe, you have Ford. There's plenty of Fords around, not as many as Peugeots or whatever, but you have and then you did and what is it? Opel. I don't. They were General Motors. I don't think they are anymore. But and then you have Vauxhall in the UK, which I don't know if it's still owned by GM, but it was. And so you can get them. I think you can get Plymouths. You can get like the PT Cruiser. I've seen them around. It's not like they're unavailable. I mean, you can buy them, but very few people do.
But Japanese don't buy American cars because they don't want Japanese American cars.
No, exactly. They're so. I mean, and if you speak about the cars from the 1970s, these massive land yachts, then that's when, and with these massive V8s that wouldn't even fit on many of the roads, here in France or in Japan. Yeah. I mean, the scale, and then if they have these big V8s, they just drink gas. And gas is more expensive in Europe than it is.
But I'll tell you who's going to benefit from this 90-day hiatus or suspension, whatever term you want to use, are all the politicians and the business people who sold their shares before the sanctions announcement was made.
Yeah.
Because they can now buy back those shares at a fraction of what they sold them for.
Yeah.
Now, you can't, and I can't, and most of the people watching can't, but there's a lot of people in the United States and around the world are going to be much, much wealthier as the result of the suspension. Mm-hmm. Because as soon as the suspension is announced, the shares will go up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw somewhere. I haven't looked at the news. I didn't. And what you said was the first I heard about the suspension. But apparently, they're leaving the 10% base rate on all countries except China. I haven't seen the news, so I don't know.
Yeah, the 10% is roughly what most countries have a 10% something on, not necessarily a blanket, but they have 10% tariffs on various products and services. And by the way, we haven't talked about services yet.
I know.
This is a multi-billion-dollar activity, the service industry.
Yeah.
And yet he is focused almost entirely on nuts and bolts. In fact, I saw one of his people being interviewed, and he said, well, Apple will be able to shut all their factories in China where all these little people put in screws.
We're the peasants, according to JD Peasants, all of the Chinese peasants.
And we'll ship all that to Ohio, and we'll have people there, putting in these screws. And you think, what universe is this guy in?
This is just crazy.
This is nuts. I mean, if it were a practical proposition,
nuts. That's
Apple would not have moved it.
Nuts and screws.
In the first place.
Literally nuts.
And all of a sudden, you're going to take all these guys who used to work in steel plants and train them to assemble phones. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And he knows that. Well, if he doesn't know it, I'm even more worried than otherwise. It just strikes me as bizarre. Anyway, we're almost at a close. We've got just about a minute. Is there anything you would like to say in closing that we haven't?
Well, I just want to certainly encourage everyone to come to Kevin. If you could just put up the address one more time of the to get SSRG tickets. Definitely come to the conference. We're going to have we'll have international lawyers explaining the case that Alf Baird was talking about last week. That they're bringing to the UN. We'll, we'll have, panels on, planning for negotiating with the UK. Elliot Bulmer will be talking about a future Scottish constitution.
Okay.
And we're, it should be a good gathering, and I think it's what we need right now. I think
Great.
it's coming
Super.
at a really good time.
Yeah.
Give a bit of impetus to it, and maybe even the politicians will listen. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, write to your politician and tell them to listen. They're supposed to be your servants after all. Well, thank you very much, Mark.
Okay. And thank you to all your listeners, and thank you, John and Kevin. And I'll be back anytime. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
You're most welcome. And look out for next week, folks, where we'll have a surprise guest. Take care, everyone. Good night. Look after yourselves, and cherish what you have, because you may not have it for much longer.
Exactly. Good evening, everybody.
Good night, everyone.